Thank you, Nick. At the Abdul El Sayed campaign in Detroit, we want to turn now to another one of our experts tonight. Dr. Danielle Leak is with Johns Hopkins University. She is a social media expert. Danielle, if you can hear me, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much. And I wanted to ask you a pretty specific question because we just heard from Nick at the El Sayed campaign. Obviously, the El Sayed campaign has been very active. It's tried to be on social media, but there's been a conversation whether or not social media engagement equates to engagement at the polls. So I wanted to ask you, what do we know, if anything, about what causes social media engagement to translate into voter engagement at the polls, and what doesn't make that connection?
Well, that's a great question. Well, we know that when the social media content is more partisan, that type of content is more likely to translate to voter turnout. So that was a study that was done by Harvard University. The most recent version of that research is from 2024. I expect that will be true again this year. And we can see that with the enthusiasm and the high sense of excitement that we're watching already this year. And we definitely see that with the type of content that the candidates are trying to produce and are producing well. So Al Sayed is a really good example of a candidate who has done that well and has done that even by taking down some of the more partisan content that was up prior to this campaign. So I know that you've reported before on how some of his more controversial comments from 2020, well, the campaign made sure to take down some of that content. Even though it was engaging, it wasn't going to produce the kind of voter turnout that they were looking for. So the more exciting and partisan your content is, the more likely it is to drive turnout at the polls. So we'll see if that works this year at the end of the night.
So, I mean, what would you say is the give and take of using a lot of social media, both the potential positives and potential negatives of using social media a lot in an electoral campaign, especially ones that are so highly watched as they are here in Michigan? What are the pros and the cons, really, in general?
Well, I'll tell you, some of your experts have already alluded to this. I mean, once the primaries are over, a lot of that social media content that's already been used is still out there. So candidates are stuck with it. What you've said stays with you. So how you've been perceived in the primaries, you're going to have to stick with that as part of your authentic self throughout the rest of the election. And that can become a strength and a potential obstacle once the general election gets started. So if you can't win in this upcoming race using the same presentation of self that you had going in the primary, it can become a real challenge. So as many people have already said, and when we're talking about the Senate election, for example, if we see the outcome for Abdul Sayed, it could become a challenge if staying on the left side of the Democratic Party doesn't work in this general election. Well, we'll see the outcome of having that much social media content focused on those kinds of arguments really becomes a strength or a weakness. The same thing is true if you don't have that social media content out there. Trying to pivot and become a real strong supporter of a particular position, if you haven't been speaking out like that prior to a change in the race, well, it can become difficult to claim that you've always felt that way if you don't have a record showcasing that in the past. So social media is now the new way to establish what you believed before and what you're going to believe after certain times in an election.
And that last comment kind of leads into my next question, but as Juliet alluded to, you're a very familiar voice here at 13 on your side on this topic. So I would also ask you, I mean, how has the social media scene and its impact on elections as a whole, how has that changed since we really started tracking this since the advent of social media?
Well, one thing that we've seen a lot of, especially in this race, and I know everybody that's watching is familiar with this, is the impact of artificial intelligence on social media content. I mean, we were just talking about the example of the commercial that included one of our candidates looking like they were part of the Odyssey. Well, that's just one example of the kind of content that can be created so quickly with the advent of artificial intelligence. So it's not just the fact that we can create content fast and content that looks really real and really good, but it means there's so much more potential for disinformation. And that's not just in advertising. It's even those of us who are voters who are seeking information and trying to find out where to go to the polls, how to go to the polls, who's winning the election. AI just creates so much more information so quickly. It can be hard for us to decipher what's truth and fact from what's fiction. And that has changed really, really rapidly from where we started with social media races back in the early 2000s. So we have a lot to watch out for as voters and citizens who are trying to make decisions about who the right candidate is for us. We're going to have to keep an eye out for that later this fall.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of expand on that if you would. I mean, what would you say to voters about the importance of being aware and, to the best of their ability, being able to distinguish the fake from the real, despite the fact that it's just everywhere these days?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important for all of us to remember we're only human. And that means that all of us can make mistakes. So it's important for us to take an extra second to check things that are important to us. It's okay to be wrong, but it's not okay to not check the information that we have in front of us. It's a second check only takes 30 seconds, and that second check can make the difference between what we think to be true and what we know to be right. The second thing is to make sure that we have in our heads what are good sources of information. That's why it's important to have an organization like WZZM, a legitimate local news source that we can use as a verifiable source. We can always go to our local news or to a national news service to double check something and to really trust our gut. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It's okay to wait to make a decision until we've had a chance to check what we think is real.
Dr. Danielle Leek with Johns Hopkins University, thank you so much, Doctor. Really appreciate your time tonight.